Thank you for your interest in Jean's sermon series. This is Atheist Ambivalences Part 1, a talk I gave originally at the Unitarian Church in San Juan, Texas, it was December 29th of 2013. So, I was brought up without religion, more or less. Both of my parents were born in Mormon families, but by the time they met at the University of Utah, not Brigham Young University, I point out, they had both fallen away from that and were quite skeptical about it. It's true that when I was very little, I got taken to the Unitarian Church sometimes. That was because my father liked to sing, but as many Unitarians know, they don't do a lot of talking about God there. The main topic I remember from my Sunday school lessons was civil rights. I do remember the first time somebody talked to me about God, and that was my grandmother on my mother's side. She told me the basic theory about God and showed me how to pray and said I was supposed to do it daily, which I did not do. She gave me a book of children's Bible stories, which I read, but I read a whole lot of stuff, and it didn't really take. I saw her at most a couple times a year, and it just wasn't enough. By the time I was a teenager, it was clear to me that I was never going to believe in God or anything else supernatural. If you want to read more about that, I've written a small amount about it on my blog. That's not the topic of this sermon. This is not an area of ambivalence for me. I don't have any doubts whatsoever. Where the ambivalence comes in is how to handle myself in a world where most people do, in fact, believe in God. Now, this is not a huge question in a certain sense. I mean, we live in a world where religious killings do occur, but not right around the corner from where we're at. I don't think it's likely that I personally will ever have to face an inquisition or a fatwa death sentence or anything of that kind. If I did think that that was more than an extremely remote danger, I would behave differently. I would probably stay fairly deep in the atheism closet and not go around giving public talks like this one. But there's littler stuff, that is to say littler than life and death anyway, etiquette issues mostly, that come up for me all the time. And in a relatively culturally homogeneous place like the Valley where we live, there's this widespread background agreement about the role of faith in life. And how do I handle myself in this environment? I don't want to come across as being an anti-Catholic bigot, or worse still, a racist. And also, at the very same time, I want to avoid becoming the target of anti-atheist bigotry, of which there is a certain amount, right? Many people from a culturally homogeneous background, where most folks are believers, have an inner caricature in their mind of what an atheist is. An atheist can be seen as a hateful person, a purely negative person. Maybe somebody who doesn't have any moral compass. Someone who doesn't build things or respect things that other people have built. A kind of spiritual vandal that takes pleasure in disrespecting and defacing all of the things that ordinary people hold to be beautiful and sacred. Now, if I accidentally fire up the inner atheist caricature in somebody's mind, I feel like after that point, they can't really see me at all, and no further communication is possible. So I hope to avoid that, and that's one of a number of things that I hope to avoid. I also prefer not giving offense to people's deepest beliefs. I want to treat people gently, but at the same time, I want to be my authentic self with people. And there's another thing, which is that I am a teacher by profession, and my goal is to increase the total amount of enlightenment in the world. And I feel quite passionate about this. You could say that education is my religion. So I want to be true to kindness and honesty, and to my, as you might say, sacred calling. Okay. Let's get down to cases. A former student of mine posted on Facebook relatively recently saying that her brother was in dire straits medically and asking everybody to join with her in praying for a miracle for him at 10 p.m. tonight. That is, tonight of the day she posted. And many people had already replied saying yes, they would pray for him. So, what should I do? Should I respond as well on the thread saying, yes, I will pray for you? Or would that be a wrong thing to do in some way? Would it be even possibly disrespectful in some sense? I could, with absolute truthfulness, say something else, such as, I'll be thinking of you and your brother. But that doesn't sound like much to me. I'll be thinking about you. It seems like pretty thin gruel compared to I'll pray for you. And this is just one of a number of linguistic gaps. Thank God, and other expressions like that are others. Linguistic gaps where communities of believers have these settled ritual ways of expressing sympathy and emotional solidarity to each other, and I just can't quite decide whether I should participate in that or not. What's the right thing to do? Do I risk seeming snooty and put-downy if I refuse the communal response that's expected? Or do I risk seeming insincere if I go with the flow? Now, this particular woman, my protege, she might not know me well enough to realize that there's anything at all funky about me, the atheist, saying, I'll pray for you. But the fact is, a lot of other Facebook friends of mine do know me well enough to think, that's odd. So, that's a tricky one. Case number 2. My cousin Bertie came to visit me for Christmas, and her husband Paul, and he is a Catholic, and he wanted to go to Mass on Christmas. So we all three went. At this stage of my life, I quite enjoy religious services. They are a cultural and social experience, and even in the worst case scenario where every single aspect of it is a bore, it gives me an opportunity for silent meditation and psychological self-renewal, which I now enjoy. So, okay, we're there at Mass. Paul participates fully. He does all of the things. The crossing himself, the responses, the kneeling prayers, the hitting himself on the breast, the singing, and finally the culmination, going up and taking communion. Bertie did none of it. She just sat silently through the whole service with her hands folded, respectfully, with a respectful look on her face, but nothing else. I did some of the things. Okay, the service was in Spanish, so I couldn't always figure out even what was going on. But I sang when I could figure out the hymn number, and I did the responses when I could figure out where we were in the book. But I didn't take communion because I know that that's against the rules, that only people who are in good standing and who have confessed and so forth are supposed to go up and do that, and obviously I had not. I'm not Catholic. And I also didn't cross myself because I was afraid of getting it wrong in some way, getting the details wrong. And I was embarrassed. Would have been embarrassed if I had tried. And I didn't do the kneeling because when Paul pulled out the kneeling bar to use it, he whispered sideways to me, "You don't have to do this." And so even though I wanted to do it, I felt like, well, now I can't because I didn't want to create a weird mood between us. I didn't want him worrying about what was going on in my head. He had the right to have his own Catholic Mass experience without thinking about me, right? Because I'm just along for the ride, sort of. So I thought about it later. The thought crossed my mind. I could go to Mass again by myself after Bertie and Paul went home. And I could study up the moves on YouTube, like how to do the crossing and all of the stuff. And I could do it all. I could even go up and take communion, right? Just like an undercover agent, I could do these things. And, okay, obviously it's against the rules, but this would totally be a victimless crime. Nobody would know me, would know who I was. They would just think, oh, there's a different Catholic from someplace else, if they thought anything at all. And per my assumption, there is no omniscient supernatural observer to be offended. And I would know that even in my own secret innermost heart, that I had no unkind, mocking intentions. That I wasn't being mean or disrespectful, but just that this is something I wanted to try and not hold myself apart from people, but to do the thing the same time other people are doing it. So it seems to me that there would be no damage whatsoever to anybody at all if I did this. And I really can't see how it would be a moral violation of any kind. But I still, probably I will never do that. I'm just not a rule breaker. It's maybe worth pointing out, though, before I completely leave the communion issue, that when I go to a retreat, a meditation retreat, which is run by Buddhists, if they have chanting or prostrations or anything like that, I absolutely do the whole thing, the whole ceremony, with great enthusiasm. Prostration, chanting, I don't even necessarily know what the chants mean. I don't care, but I do it. So for some reason, and I guess it's just the fact that I know it's against the Catholic rules, the two cases seem different to me. In any case, example number 3. When I was younger, I uniformly, when proselytizers would come to the door, would announce myself as an atheist using that word. Because I so much value accuracy in speech. But it never led to any really great results. That word itself has an impact on people, and you can see it in their face. Like there's this instant reaction, this uh-oh, how do I handle this extreme situation? Well, I'm a sensitive person. Even when I'm dealing with just a stranger, I don't like to have created that kind of shock and alienation. Or sometimes there would be a different sort of response with somebody more experienced and self-secure. What I would see crossing their face instead is this like wave of pity. Well, dang, I didn't so much like that either. Who are you pitying? I'm the one with the better relationship to reality. Once upon a time, I answered my door, and it was this fairly young woman there with her Bible. And she said her opening line, I forget what it was exactly, And I gave my then standard response, well, I'm an atheist. And she was all smiles. Oh, that's good. That's wonderful. I'm like, really? That's not the usual response. I wondered if maybe she just really liked a challenge or something, like it would be more interesting to run into me than your typical, I go to church on Easter and Christmas type Christian. And then she said, I know you atheists read your Bible. I said, yeah, some of us do. But I was beginning to suspect that there had been a little short circuit in our communication, and in fact there had. As the conversation went on, it became clear that she thought that atheist was the name of some Protestant denomination. Like, yes, Baptists, atheists, Methodists, who cares about the details? We're all just one big Bible-reading family. And when I reflected on it again later, I decided that her wrong take about my beliefs wasn't really any wronger than all the other evangelists that came to my door and then went away again soon after. They didn't understand what it's like to be an atheist, at least my kind of atheist, any more than this young lady did. And furthermore, and let's mark this as a topic that we will return to later, maybe there is a way for Baptists and atheists really to take communion together, to regard each other as being pretty much on the same page, sharing most of their values, and in fact we do. Currently, the solution that I'm experimenting with is not saying I'm an atheist to random strangers at the door, but if I have to say something that will turn them off or lead to a quick closure of the conversation, saying I'm a Buddhist instead. And people are a lot more comfortable with that. It gives them the sensation that you are settled and they don't need to worry about you. And they don't necessarily understand all of the details, but they think of a Buddhist as being somebody like them in having a religion, even though the exact details may be very different. Let's move on. Just a moment of foreshadowing here. I hope to return to this topic in my Atheist Ambivalences Part 2. The idea of atheism as really comprising a denomination, and what if. Case 4. And this is something that is going to happen in my future, most likely. I am most likely going to have to testify in a court case sometime in the next year. And I've been fretting about it in a small way about having to get sworn in with the "so help me God" part. Okay, should I say this, that I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God? Okay, I don't have to do it because they have alternative swearing-in ceremonies that are just as legal and all that. It's not like there's no option. But publicly rejecting God could have some kind of prejudicial effect, I think, on the other people in the courtroom, which includes the judge and the lawyers and the jury. And I just don't altogether want to do that. I think it could be a risky thing to do in terms of having my testimony perceived as trustworthy. But on the other hand, can I in good conscience say, "So help me God," while taking an oath of complete truthfulness? The thing you have to understand about me is that I really care a lot about how I handle language. And there's this other thing about the closet, right? You know how some people feel like homosexuals have a moral obligation to come out of the closet because this is how public opinion gets influenced over time, person by person. Well, maybe atheists have a little bit of a similar obligation to be out of the closet. Okay, I have pretty much already made this decision about the court case. I'm going to say, so help me God, because I just don't think that taking the risk of doing something else is worth it. And I think I can just barely squeak by without feeling too underhanded about it if I mentally substitute an alternative, non-standard definition of the word God. Not the Abrahamic one, but some kind of abstract but non-mystical Platonic ideal of goodness. Okay? I'm not a nihilist or a moral skeptic. And I do have reverential feelings about the humble attitude we should have in seeking the truth. That's kind of what I mean about saying education is my religion. And so I'm comfortable saying kind of a public prayer that I will be able to serve the truth well, even though in my mind that prayer is not being addressed to an actually existing supernatural being. So if they were to ask me a follow-up question, I'd be in trouble, right? Okay, do you in fact believe in the God that you just called upon for help? Then I would have to come out of the atheist closet, but of course they're not going to do that. It's just a ritual, right? I'm telling myself that whatever moral taint there is here is not on me. It's on the system that continues to authorize sectarian paraphernalia, intruding on the public sphere with it. Courtrooms and other public places ought to be secular because they should be equally for the protection of all citizens. But it's just that I'm so obsessive about the truth that I have to construct this elaborate mental safety net for myself in advance. Like somehow, and I know this is ridiculous, but what if later in the trial somehow it comes up and I do get asked, do you believe in God? I know it's not going to happen. But if it did, I'm ready with a 100% truthful answer, which is, I don't believe in God in the usual sense of that word. And then, as necessary, I could go on to say some things about Spinoza's God or the way Einstein used the word God, but I know this won't ever come up. It's just ridiculous. Just shut up already, Gene. You're so neurotic. Example 5. The classroom. You might think that it would be simple to keep religion out of the classroom, but in fact, if you're in the literature business, reading it or writing it, it's not. Okay? It's not uncommon for students to find some of the reading I've assigned offensive for religious reasons. There's an annual prize anthology called Best American Essays. A version of it comes out every year with new choices for what are the best essays published in America, in the U.S. this last year. And I assign this as a textbook almost every semester. And in the most recent one, which is Best American Essays 2013, there's an essay called What Happens in Hell by Charles Baxter. And among other things, Baxter describes a conversation that he has with a Muslim taxi driver and his own emotional reactions to what the guy says. So now, do I assign this piece? Plenty of people around here believe in a literal hell, and they could be miffed by the tone of Baxter's essay. Or, and this is actually even more common, students that are inexperienced with Baxter's kind of secular worldview could just miss his point completely. Whew. And then if they do I go on and explain it? No, you guys, see, Baxter thinks these attitudes are disgusting and low class, and he's so sure that his readers will agree that he doesn't even explain it overtly. Yeah, so maybe I better not assign it. But it's one of the best pieces of writing in the book. Or now, how do I react when in my creative nonfiction classes somebody writes a personal narrative telling how Jesus intervened and saved them from what would otherwise have definitely been a fatal car crash? Or that they're in a bad situation and suffering deeply, but they know it's all part of God's plan and God never gives you more burdens than you can bear. Am I going to say, here's why I think that analysis is inaccurate? No, that's horrible. Am I going to say, please, out of consideration for my feelings, would you just avoid writing about what's most important to you, just to keep my classroom secular, please? No, that's appalling too. Creative expression is free to explore the totality of human experience. Now, there's things that I can do in these cases to dodge kind of sideways. I can say, let's consider how to paint this scene in as vivid a way as possible. What details can you include about what happened in the car accident? Or, let's consider audience issues here. Remember that you must write for audiences that includes people that are very much unlike you. Do you know that only about 1/3 of the people in the world are Christians? Can you write in such a way that you're not automatically excluding 2/3 of the world? And this can be done, by the way. There's a lot of very beautiful spiritual writing out there, and I like to assign it and teach it. Barry Lopez, for instance, has a lovely piece called Madre de Dios about his encounters with the Virgin Mary. And by the way, I'm going to put a references slide here at the end of the tape so you can pause it there and look at all of the citations if you want to. One of the things that makes Lopez's essay so beautiful is his awareness of the existence of other worldviews. And one of the worst problems with my students' spiritual writing is that they're not. And I'm in a tight spot here. Every semester I see bad spiritual writing, and I have to, as part of my job, how I interpret my job anyway, I have to engage authentically as a reader with every sincere piece of student work. And this is much trickier than any of the other cases because I'm in an ongoing relationship of unequal power with my students, where I'm supposed to be giving them guidance. The stakes are just a lot higher than even the courtroom case. Let me give you one more specific example. This is a few years ago, also in Best American Essays. There was a narrative called Patient by Rachel Reederer about being run over by a bus, and she nearly lost a leg from that accident. There was a long time, weeks or months even, when nobody was sure whether her leg was going to be salvageable. And during this time, she got visits from at least one person who kept telling her, everything happens for a reason, which under the circumstances she did not like. Well, I don't like it either. Now, Reederer didn't swear at her friend or even contradict her. She tried to accept the remark in the spirit it was intended, which I think does qualify her as a remarkably patient person. But in her own mind privately, and then of course sharing it with all of her readers, she did gripe about it. She said, not out loud, but only in her mind, that if God planned this bus accident for her, then God is a lousy planner. Well, a lot of my students took a dim view of that mental attitude. Some of them called Reederer whiny. Some of them said she should admit the bus accident was her own fault. Where are you getting that? I said. She was in a crowd, the bus drove up, there was pushing, she fell down, and the bus ran over her. Do you think anybody ever deserves to be run over by a bus? Do you really, really think that God set up this whole situation to teach this 20-year-old some kind of lesson? And did the bus driver just happen to deserve a humbling lesson too? Because it sure wasn't a good outcome for him either. Or the friends Reederer went dancing with that day. Or the people that were nearby her in the crowd. Or her mom. All of them somehow served by God's lesson. I'm trying even to imagine what it would feel like to really believe that God sets up these accidents, accidentally on purpose. You'd have to think that God had arranged for her to be at the front of the crowd and got people to bump her at exactly the right second, and then the driver touches the accelerator, but just very lightly, just enough to get the bus on top of her leg and then stay there for a little while to crush the leg just the exactly right amount for it to be at risk of complete amputation, but also still just barely savable after weeks of uncertainty, if that's in fact the plan. That would require precise calibration on God's part. Okay, roll the bus. Crunch, crunch, pressure, pressure. Okay, pressure, 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 pressure. Okay, enough, roll on. This vision of God's actions is so ugly to my mind that I feel offended on God's behalf, on behalf of a holy mythical being, mind you, but I'm still insulted that anybody would think God would be that kind of a person. And how much of these thoughts do I let out in the classroom? How much respect do I have to show for attitudes that I think are really, when you follow them to their logical conclusions, they're damagingly bad? I mean, I think that it is actually, I think that you cannot be a fully compassionate person if you don't believe that there are ever true accidents. You have to have a belief in randomness to view the victim of an accident with complete sympathy, like it could have been anyone, like it could have been you. So I realize that the reactions of my students may be largely unthinking, unexamined reflexes, but is it my duty as an educator to coax them into examining the reflexes more fully? Or is it my duty as a culturally sensitive person and a professor who wants to wield her power gently to keep my ding-dang mouth shut? That's what I ask myself on a relatively frequent basis. And I don't know. And issues like this come up all the time. The thing is, literature addresses our most intense hopes and fears and gropings for significance. And that's God's territory too. This is the end of Jean's Atheist Ambivalences, Part 1. Thanks for your interest. See you in Part 2.